Let me ask you this. Bradley Edwards, do you think or suspect that he has killed or attacked anyone else?
Bradley Edwards, I can now describe for what he is: a brutal rapist and murderer. He's been convicted of two of the most horrific murders on young women in Australia, and on his own admission is a very, very perverted rapist and violent.
But are there any cold cases? Are there any missing person cases that you're worried about that could be linked potentially?
The investigations into this man will continue. Now, I'm not going to extrapolate what cases are you talking about, but we will talk.
Are there any?
Oh, look, we will of course speak to him, and yes, we do want to talk to him about serious crime. I'm not going to expand any more than that.
But I'm talking about your concerns. I mean, you don't seriously expect him to give it up, do you? Anything?
Look, we should never say never, because when you think you've hit a roadblock and you think, well, that's not going to work, history tells us that the human condition is such that at times people will react differently than what we can hypothesise they're going to do. So I don't want to, with any certainty, say, look, it's these specific offences that we want to further investigate. But I've said very, very openly, and I've got to, and everyone has to, accept the acquittal that took place only yesterday in terms of the killing of Sarah Spiers. I'll come straight to the point. Bradley Edwards has been found not guilty of that particular crime. But I will very clearly say that we will never stop looking and we will never stop investigating until there's a resolution in regard to finding Sarah Spiers and bringing forward before the courts, if we have the evidence, the person who is responsible for murdering Sarah.
You still think he killed Sarah Spiers?
Best I answer by asking people to read the judgment that Justice Hall delivered.
Well, he said it was most likely, but he couldn't find beyond reasonable doubt.
They're the words of the Justice.
I think it's generally accepted in the last couple of years of this case, the police work was fantastic. It was excellent, world class. But for many, many years before that, during this search and on the receiving end of millions taxpayers' dollars and public anxiety, it was bad, Commissioner. There were mistakes made, there were missteps, there were omissions. Here's the bottom line in this case. This bloke, from 1988, for 10 years that we know, was attacking, assaulting, raping and murdering for 10 years. And yet he was never even a suspect. As you've admitted, he was never on your list until 2016. How is that possible, and how is that anywhere near good police work?
Because you're being very selective. You're being very selective. I've got no contest that the behaviour of Bradley Edwards, by his own admission and what we now know, was escalating. That's not the first time that has occurred, and it won't be the last time it will occur. People who are addicted to sadistic and to perverted pornography don't always escalate to what, in police parlance, we call contact offending. In this case, it went from clearly a fetish of women's underwear to then breaking into homes, to then becoming into contact, physical contact with what we now know were young women who were targeted by him, and then it escalated ultimately to the most horrific, rapes, and then these crimes of which he has now been convicted of murder. It is an escalation of offending which I would like to say, had we been able to stop him in 1988, this would never have happened. Of course, we'd all want that. But I will not accept that a 1988 investigation and a 1990 conviction would have stopped all of this. He was a convicted person in 1990, but he was released into the community after that conviction.
Well, he wasn't even released. It was probation. It was pathetic.
Well, I'm just putting it out there, that there are many people that we get processed through that they don't all escalate onto this most heinous of crimes. In this case, he did.
Why did that escalation stop so suddenly in 1997?
Look, foremost in a lot of that elements of the investigation, and taking a lot of advice both internationally, nationally, and it was part of the DPP prosecution, were that there were events in this man's life in terms of personal relationships, marriage, and a number of pivotal events which Justice Hall had to consider. And I can't go too much more because the man has not yet been sentenced, but certainly the personal lives of such offenders are part of not only investigative, but they were part of a prosecution process that put forward. This is not the first time where events in people's lives have quite a radical impact, and I'll generalise this now, where people's behaviour, if something goes awry in their personal life, it may well bring on a lashing out into the community for offending against other people.
So I'll ask you again, do you think from 1997, from Kira Glennon's murder until he was arrested in 2016, do you think he perpetrated any act upon any person?
There's no charge that's been laid, and I'm not going to comment further on our further work that we will continue to do, but certainly his behaviour has been exhaustively examined. That examination is not stopping. My closing comment is, if we want to look for the cause of all this, don't forget, Bradley Edwards is the man that has caused all this grief. And we need to attribute the cause of all this absolute grief and harm to Bradley Robert Edwards. That doesn't mean that police should not be accountable, and I accept that not every step that was made on the way through this very long and very complex investigation was without cause for people to criticise. But the outcome for the victims is that a brutal rapist and murderer is now facing sentence.